Hi there, welcome back. In this short lecture, we will try to understand about the configuration manager sites as well as the site roles. So in the previous lecture, we installed domain controller, and we are gonna install in the upcoming lectures about the configuration manager prerequisites followed by the installation. So before we jump into that specific topics, let's first understand, or let me give you some kind of introduction for configuration manager server. So this is a powerful tool used by IT professionals to manage software deployments. For example, you can automatically install any kind of software on your client machines, or you can perform the patch management, or you can update the softwares and the configurations across your larger network connected devices. And this can manage deployments throughout your hierarchy with the help of different type of sites. So when it says sites, again, there are could be different sites. We can take it here like a central site, primary site, secondary site. Each site will perform its different roles. In a minute we're going to understand about these site types, but let's understand these sites are made up with the hierarchy. If you look at here, for example, Toronto is the site location, physical location. So within this location, let's say if you configure as the top level site, you can call it as a central site. So this central administration site, or CAS, we can name this as the CAS. So what would happen is this CAS site can be can have its own primary sites, meaning the blue color, for example, Houston, London, or Shanghai. These three can be represented as the primary sites, and every primary can have a secondary sites, but the secondary sites cannot go directly and report to Toronto. That's not possible. Secondary sites always go back to primary site. So in this case, this is a site Houston. It will always report. Seattle site will report to Houston. By the way, if you look at here, every site has its own a code, right? So if you look at the code, the unique code, for example, Manchester is represented here as a MAN. So meaning MAN site can be represented as MAN. So in this case, let's say, so they could be alphanumerical, any kind of number. For example, I can call, since this is a secondary site, I can represent as S01 example. So I have a multiple options to represent in a different ways. So you can have for example, man or S01, and my primary sites, I should be able to represent this as the for example, PO1, and this can be a PO2, primary site 2, or this can be PO3 example, or I can represent this Toronto site itself as a CAS. So why we represent with the site codes? So this is called a site code, we call it. So because the client always try to communicate with the help of site code. So once it knows the site code, it will then later point it will try to retrieve the site information with the according to the required roles. For example, every site will have its own roles. So in one word, to explain more about the CAS site, or we call it in this case central administration site. So this is a highest level site. If you can see here from it, Toronto, this is a top level site, and it will be very useful in order to manage a larger very large or larger organizations or a complex deployments, and you can manage all the down level sites straightforward directly from this site called CAS site. So most of the time we will install this site for the reporting point of view or central administration point of view. Let's say if you try to deploy maybe a patch management or softwares, you should be able to deploy it to all of the sites directly from a single site, in this case Toronto. Let's say you are trying to deploy maybe MS Office for London and Shanghai and Houston. You should be able to do it directly from here instead of every time performing the site configuration or the deployment directly here. So that's the advantage what you have by going into the CAS site. So when we talk about the primary site, so the primary site is the, I would put it another way, this is a building blocks for the configuration manager hierarchy, because without the primary, the clients cannot communicate. Client always try to communicate with your primary site, and then it will do the required actions. For example, whatever the applications that you are performing, or maybe software deployments or patch management or the complaint specific settings, all that can be deployed directly from primary site. So in this case, if you have a multiple primaries, you could actually do it directly from the CAS site, and that same configuration will be available here as an inherited. I mean, it's actually down flow from a top to down. The configuration what you configure will come back here. So that's the advantage when you have the CAS site. So that being said, if you look at the primary site will be useful to manage your clients directly and perform tasks for your software distribution or compliance settings, as I said. And it is fully responsible for your local administration and the client communication point of view. And the last is down level of the hierarchy, we call it this as the secondary sites. So the secondary sites are used to manage clients that are located in a remote locations, where you have you have a very low bandwidth between this location. For example, Seattle has maybe close to 500 machines or 100 machines. So you wanted to manage these, very low number of machines, and instead of going over this tunnel to Houston, you wanted to manage directly from here. So in that case, you would be configuring secondary site, and clients, whenever it is needed, it will try to report here, and one time the secondary site will get replicated with Houston, or maybe it will communicate there. So I would put it another way: where do you have the bandwidth constraints locations, you would be deploying the secondary sites. Now let's also look at other way around. On the client side, clients always reports to a primary site, and in this case, even the secondary site also reports to the primary, and the primary site always reports to CAS, just in case if they have the hierarchy. And I forgot to include here, if you look at here, there is other additional example can be explained. It's not mandatory that you have to have mandatorily a CAS site and then followed by a primary or secondary. What if you have a single location, or a single site itself can manage easily 50,000 plus or 1 lakh plus machines? It can manage as a primary site. As I said earlier, the primary sites itself is a building block of your configuration manager, right? So this itself, if you have only one primary site, you do not have any secondary sites, in that situation you call this as the primary site, but it's a standalone primary site, or standalone site you would call it. Similarly, if you have a hierarchy with the primaries and secondaries, you can have that kind of design also, where you just have only one primary, but there are some kind of geo political issues, or maybe you have a very large environment, then you might be having a multiple primaries. Then it's good to have a CAS site. Otherwise, we never deploy a CAS site unless you have a multiple primary sites requirement. I hope you understand the concept. There are a couple of roles that can be enabled on the server or on these sites, so that they can perform a specific configuration, or specific functionality can be enabled by using that role. So what exactly a role we call it as a kind of functionality that is going to enable on any of these primaries, or maybe secondaries, or a CAS site. It depends on where that role is going to enable. We would be talking that, but most of the roles can be enabled on a primary sites as well as the CAS sites, and the secondary sites mostly will have the branch distribution point, or maybe could have your DPs, or you could have state migration point, or software update management point. So these are the couple of roles you would have it. But let's actually talk about what are the site roles we have. So the first and the foremost role would be the I would put it the management point. Let's talk about each of these roles. There are close to 16 to 18 different roles based on the functionality that you're going to enable on type of this site. So let's take for the first one is the asset intelligent synchronization point. So this role is very helpful in order to collect inventory data related to the softwares and hardware from a client machines. Uh, so that's where you would be using asset intelligent feature. Other one would be the certificate registration point. This will be helpful in order to enables clients to request and renew certificates for features like HTTPS communication or enhancing security within SCCM. The other role within this list, which I have listed, is the CMG, or you call it as a cloud management gateway connection point. This is going to facilitate secure communication between your configuration manager and your cloud services by enabling management the clients over the internet without a need of your VPN connectivity. So you can manage the clients without need of your VPN with the help of cloud management gateway. So that's where you're gonna enable this role so that a connection gateway will be enabled. And the data warehouse service point is an additional role. It's going to aggregate the historical data from your config manager database to create reports and dashboards for a longer term analysis, or you call it as a business intelligence. For example, you might be using CMDB to pull out some kind of information, or in different situations you would be using the business intelligence for data warehouse service point. So they're very rarely used, but yes, this is useful. And coming back to the DP, so this is the distribution point role. So ideally, a distribution point role is nothing but it's going to store your distribute whatever the packages or content that you're going to distribute to the clients. A central repository, I would put it, and that's where it would store. So when you look at from the client side, the DB main role would be it's going to optimize your network traffic, and it will enhance your software package deployment in an efficient way so that the clients will only download from distribution point the source content, and DP knows that how much bandwidth to be given to the clients, and the client also knows with the help of a service called background intelligent transfer service. So with the help of that service, it knows that what kind of bandwidth to be utilized, or how much available bandwidth is available. I should be using all of them or only the 10% or 20% of it. Even let's if you look at in this way, for example, Boston has a DP role. So if you push of course, all the machines here, whatever you see the DPs, or all these sites will have definitely a DP role, and you push from here maybe a 1 GB package. So the 1 GB package content will be first reaches to all of these primaries and secondary sites, because we would be ideally enabling their distribution point role, and the clients will download directly from your DP, because DP is accessible locally, not the remote DP, right? So it's a LAN. Over the LAN it can download, but the content, if you look at the content, it is actually transferred one time to Boston location, and you might have maybe 500 machines. So 500 machines will download over the LAN, not over the internet. That's where the DP will be useful. And the next role would be the endpoint protection role. So endpoint protection point would be the nothing but your Microsoft Defender, Windows Defender. So you could create your antivirus policies and uh, exceptions and file types to be blocked. All of that can be done, and you can manage centrally endpoint protection, which is nothing but your Windows Defender antivirus policies, and you can report them to config MGR. In other way, it's going to streamline your endpoint security management with the help of endpoint protection management. Yes, if you have the config manager full license, you do have the antivirus license. You can see here endpoint protection point also would be covering. And if you have a question on other point, one would be the enrollment point. So enrollment point, which will allows devices to enroll as a mobile devices in config MGR by extending management capabilities to the mobile platforms. So you all might be thinking what I'm talking about, the mobile device management. Yes, that's true. Mobile device management can be done with the help of configuration manager or config MGR. I'm not talking about the Intune in this case. I'm talking about a, a dedicated on-premises device management functionality also available within the config MGR. So don't think that it's a Intune capabilities. No, I'm talking about the on-premises device management capabilities built in available within the config mgr. Most of the people thinks that this is the mdm. When we refer to the mdm, they think that it's all about the Intune, but no, you do have a flexibility within the config mgr also. So in that case, it's the on-premises mdm server. Okay. The next thing would be the enrollment proxy point. The proxy point and enrollment point both are dependent, I would say, because the enrollment point would be useful during the enrollment or the device management capabilities for the mobile devices. But the enrollment proxy point would facilitate basically communication between the enrollment point and Active Directory in terms of the certificate services during the enrollment of your mobile devices. So that's where it's going to be useful. Now, when we talk about the FSP, fallback status point, which is additional role I would like to cover here, we call this as the fallback status point. Say, let's say you're trying to install the client, and for some reason you don't know, the client got failed, but you wanted to know why what error code it was generated on your all the clients. Then during the in the event of failure, the client can send that error code information to a status point. Even though it does not have a client software installed, it can understand that code. So the code would be transferred to the fallback status point. So that's where the FSP would be useful. The next role would be the management point role. So management point is going to facilitate your client communications and the policy enforcement, securing your timely software deployments, and the client status reporting is a fully responsible by your management point. And we also shortly call this as a MP, this as the FSP, and this as a DP in a short. So most of the time we call these, or the common words we call it during our day-to-day operations work. So MP is a very key. So let's say you deployed some software, when the based on the schedule it has to execute, right? So the scheduled information to pull that, or the new thing that was, has to be executed on the client machine, which would actually talk by management point in terms of the policy. So from a policy point of view, management point is very useful. And if MP is down, your SCCM infra is completely down, because client doesn't do anything, it just sits idle, and you have to fix your MP issue or management point issue. Let's also talk about the RP. So RP is nothing but the your reporting service point. So reporting service point would help you in terms of the configuration manager with your SQL Server reporting services. It's going to integrate. So the database is different, because in the backend, config mgr will store the database in the cm underscore site code information. Let's say if it is a London site, London as a primary site, the database is storing under a cm underscore lon site. So that's the database name within the London, right? And you would have you have to install something called a SQL reporting services point. That's the additional software that you need to install. Once you install that, you could run the reports. So during the enabling this reporting service point, it actually creates a reports as the database, and it would actually pull the data from your database config mgr database, and then it is going to facilitate for you SRS based reports, the web based reports can be facilitated. The next thing would be the service connection point. Service connection point, it's going to facilitate communication between your config mgr, that's your SCCM or Microsoft Configuration Manager server, and the online services like Microsoft Intune, or enabling your co-management, or maybe cloud-based features like CMG or Cloud DP. For those things, you need to have something called a service connection point. So this is the role which is going to facilitate between your config mgr and online services. The connection service point would be useful. Even if you want to upgrade your existing version of your config mgr also to the next version, actually service connection point would help you to download and check with the Microsoft, hey, what is my current version and what version is available to download. So that's where it's going to be useful. And the site database is nothing but the database. It is the config mgr database. It's going to store your complete configuration, inventory data, or the policies information, all of that will be stored within the uh, site database. And when we talk about the SMS provider or SMS proof, or we call it as SMS provider, so this is going to act as a WMI provider for your site database and allowing external applications to access. When I say external applications, for example, within the console also, when you try to open your config mgr console and collections, when you're trying to work with the collections, all of that, it actually queries to the WMI of the site database, and it would retrieve and it will interact with that database and gives you the data for you. So SMS provider is a key in other way. So whatever the actions you're going to perform on your config mgr console, in the backend it's going to performed by your SMS provider. Now let's talk about the software update point. So software update point is, as the name suggested, it will be useful, or it is nothing but your WSS kind of role, which is going to synchronize your software updates from Microsoft updates, and then it will be useful in order to deploy the patches to your clients, and it's going to enhancing your system security compliance on your devices. And state migration point would be rarely used, but it is very useful in terms of upgrading or you're managing your operating system deployments. Then state migration point will be useful. Let's say you want to migrate all the user data from one machine to a newly given hardware, but the data should come, then you would actually capture with the state migration um, with the help of SMP or state migration point, with the help that you would convert, or you would migrate all the data from the old machine to new machine. So that's where state migration point will be useful. That's one example I did talk. So many things that are possible within the sites. These are the couple of things that I would talk about as a role. So consider this as the introduction lecture before we move forward. Thank you for watching this. I'll catch you in the next lecture.